Dawn fog sits low on the bridge, and the stalls wake slow as animals. Carts lift their ribs, poles knock together. The river breathes under planks that remember better mornings. You stand at the Lazar House gate with cold fingers and a job that was invented to make guilt look organized. A pouch of tin badges hangs at your hip. Your board of names weighs more than wood should. If seeing how small metal passes decide who eats and who is seen keeps you leaning in, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Today we walk the hour where pity is policy and policy is priced. The Beatles' drum pops 3 quiet taps. That is the signal. 1 hour inside the rope for those with passes. Separation but succor, the statute says, as if careful Latin can hold back breath. You open the pouch. The badges are stamped with a cross or the staff of Lazarus. Tin and pewter mostly, pretty in the fog until you remember why they shine. The cords are cut from old linen and new fear. A hedge priest came earlier and mumbled over them. He sprinkled salt and said the words he hires to work mornings. The Brotherhood of St. Lazarus lined bread on the plank by the door before dawn and then vanished the way water vanishes on warm stone. Your task is simple until it isn't. Check scars, check names, tie the ribbon so it shows without making a spectacle. Walk each bearer to the bread row and back before the hourglass empties. Keep the rope honest. Keep the market calmer than it wants to be. The new guild rule sits in your head like a pebble in a shoe. Bells at the elbow, they voted last night. Wear the bell so people can hear you before they see you. Your passes say quiet passage. Quiet only works if you enforce it. The first woman is wrapped neat in green. The hood falls low. She presents her wrist like a shopper shows coin. The scars there are old, pale as a scraped knee from another year. Her name is on your board with a little dot. Respited 3 times already. She breathes through her mouth and asks for 1 more week in a voice that wants to be taken back. You could write it. A dot is easy. The hour is not. Behind her, a baker lays out loaves like soldiers. He has written a sign that says, "No service without bell." He means it like a dare. A child from the far lane reaches to touch a badge, and a mother drags the little hand back hard. The hand remembers, and so does the wrist. The fog holds the sound for later. The market ring is a rope tied to stakes that learn patience. Watchmen circle with batons set against armpits to measure distance without having to think. The tanners have already started their vat, and the reek says, "You will be taking vinegar breaths soon." Guild beetles with painted staves rehearse their scowls. The fish row sluices boards and the eels slap like insults. An apothecary appears on cue with neat packets of rue and brimstone labeled against rot. His price is written honest as long as the buyer looks like they can pay. You call the first name. The woman in green lifts her head. You tie the badge for her with 2 fingers so it sits high without strangling. You do not tie the bell. She watches your hands and says nothing. You walk her to the bread plank. The seller sets a loaf down, looks at the cord, then looks at you for your nod. You nod the way clerks nod when they want the nod to be the story. The Beatles' drum taps again to mark the first minute gone. At the fish row, a hand comes quick for a better cut of eel, and the fishwife slaps it away before the thought can spread. She does not look at the badge. She looks at your staff and the rope and the space in which she could lose her morning if she fumbles. The miller 2 stalls over leans out and whispers, "Show me your seal to a man whose scars are newer than his courage." You hear the old word unclean roll under someone's breath, and you step into the sound with your body. You do not raise your staff. You do not raise your voice. You raise the board of names like scripture and tap the line with the point of a nail. The baker waits until you are close before rehearsing his rule. No bell, no sale. He keeps his eyes on the loaf so he can later say he never saw the face. The woman in green turns her wrist so the ribbon glints. She does not lift her hood. You say quiet passage, and the baker pretends to mishear. He weighs a loaf with an exaggerated sigh and sets it down like a favor he will gossip about later. You note it on the slate. The mark is small. The meaning gets heavy by lunch. You walk her back. That is part of the deal. A moving island in a river. Hold the space. Keep the hour. You pass a lad who used to shine coins by running them up and down his shirt. He shines his mother's vinegar ladle now. He lowers it from the window. A purse sits in it. The rope creaks. He hoists to the cellar. He lowers bread. No contact except rope. It is neat until the rope breaks. He checks knots the way he used to check tricks. You take the next bearer. He uses a clapper instead of a bell, a wooden tongue that he clicks softly twice when he reaches a corner. The clapper is older than the bell rule and friendlier. A guild beetle points his painted staff and shakes his head even before the man lifts the clapper to show it. You step between staff and man and say the word the statute likes best. Succor. It makes you sound like a book. It makes the beetle sound like a drum. 3 names in, the collector for alms lifts his ladle and lets the first coin clink into it with a flourish. His sign says alms. His list says tax. You do not read the difference out loud. You record the coin with a small quiet mark, because small quiet marks move carts. The woman in green returns without meeting your eyes, as if thanks would become a habit she can't afford. You tie the next badge. The boy with the clapper tests its mouth and makes it say friend. The rope gives you just enough space to feel like something is working. The baker refuses the bell again for a different face, and you take your first find to a stall. It is small, the size of a loaf. The beetle writes it into his tally with a little sigh that says he likes arithmetic more than people. The baker mutters that rules keep cities safe. You mutter back that rules are to keep the morning from becoming memory. A child tries again to touch a badge. The mother's hand comes faster this time. It catches the wrist, not cruel, just final. The badge bearer flinches anyway. You feel the flinch crawl up your own arm. The fishwife calls you clerk, as if it is an insult and a prayer, and gestures with her knife for you to handle the man blocking her gutter. He steps aside. Eels slap again. A miller asks for your seal because the guild told him to start asking. You show the parish stamp pressed on beeswax last night when the candle was low. He grunts like a man who preferred arguing with air. The tanners pour and the smell finds your rag. You tie it over your nose and breathe the way you learned at the winter flu season. The world becomes wool and vinegar and you for a few minutes. A hedge priest wanders by pretending not to sell blessings for small coin. He touches badge cords with 2 fingers, says the name of a saint, and moves on before anyone can accuse him of selling hope. The Brotherhood of St. Lazarus reappears with a second basket of bread for those who were late. They do not lift their heads. They are good at being seen as function. The woman in green lingers at the edge of the rope. She watches another bearer shake the clapper twice and stare down a boy who looks like he can see fine enough to pretend he cannot. You glance at your board. Her dot is more ink than space now. 1 week would be easy to add. You would write it tall and the baker would hate you for the ink. You feel the pebble of the bell rule again in your shoe. A burly porter in a blue hood slips into the ring with a crisp badge on silk that your fingers do not recognize. He carries someone else's basket. He has the posture of a man who wins arguments by being first to say the word. You lift your board and ask for his name. He says his sister's sick. He says this basket will save Elaine. Your eyes slide to the edge of his hands to the missing scars. The badge is clean. The silk is wrong. He tries to move when you think. You put the staff across his path like a fence. The beetle raises his painted stave. The guild steward appears as if pulled by coin and says your house dumps ringers to dodge dues. He smiles a smile that reads as complaint and ambition. You decide to inspect, not insult. You ask the porter to show his seal. He shows the badge again as if bigger makes truer. You touch it with a finger and the tin says nothing. Your own stamped discs carry a tiny burr where the die is tired. This one is smooth. You call for a watchman. He measures distance with his baton because even justice must now carry a ruler. The porter backs out fast as if distance were law and law air. You note the counterfeit in a quick sideways hand. Your supervisor will smell that sentence the way dogs smell other dogs. The market watches itself for a taut minute. You move a woman with a real badge past a cluster of shoulders that think they should decide who eats. She nods like a professional. You take her to the bread row. The baker sets out a loaf slower than earlier. He is already a better man than he was. You hate that you used a fine to teach it. The beetle's drum ticks again. 5 minutes gone. You keep the hour in your mouth. It keeps you. A guild beetle bumps your shoulder on purpose to make you spill the board. You do not. He grins like a boy who learned how grown-ups get away with things. The apothecary offers you a rue packet as a courtesy. You tuck it in your hood where it can find your breath. He tells you brimstone dries sores if used properly, and you say it dries everything if used wrong. He shrugs the shrug of a shopkeeper who intends to live long enough to meet his own price tomorrow. Your first bearer without a clapper arrives. He has scars in the soft places around the ear where bells catch. He says nothing. He looks at your hands with interest in what they will do. You tie the badge high, and you do not reach for a bell. He exhales a sentence without words that spells something like, "Thank you." The fishwife sees and keeps slicing eels as if work is an answer. The rope shows you both of its faces now. On one side, mercy turns into the right to move in a crowded place. On the other side, fear points and purchases confidence a loaf at a time. Your job is to turn your board so the side that helps is the side that faces. You do it the way you were taught to tie knots. By habit, by little motions you can afford. The woman in green asks again, softer for the weak. She has learned your face and knows where your mouth hides the yeses. You look at the baker's sign. You look at the beadle's drum. You look at the guild steward, rehearsing how to say the word complaint in front of witnesses. You tell her to return at noon for a decision because noon is a church time that keeps men polite. She nods. She understands you moved the decision to a place with more rules. A watch lamp crawls closer and the market straightens its back. A second brood of carts rattles in from the south gate. The tanners laugh at a joke that does not translate to clean noses. The bellman clears his throat where names live. You reset your hourglass with a twist, and sand behaves like it will obey. The boy with the vinegar ladle lowers another rope. It creaks, and you see the strand you warned him about last week. He ties a new knot fast when the old one complains. You mark him down with a tiny curl that means capable. It is not a word you are asked to write often. It is a pleasure. A fishwife calls you clerk again, louder this time, because a man has stepped into her drain and she needs a referee before her knife invents law. You escort the man back beyond the rope with a sentence everyone understands. Keep the gutter clear. He scowls as if obeying costs teeth. You do not grin. You save grins for later when they can act like a salve and not a scab. At mid-ring, the miller has built a little tower of flour sacks with a gap that forces single file. It is clever and mean. You admire the clever because it does not ask your help. You note the mean because someone will ask you to uninvent it when the grain guild decides to pretend generosity again. The woman in green appears behind a man whose courage has always been too tall for his brain. He spits when he sees the badge. It lands near your boot. The beetle looks eager for a rule. You lift your board. You say quiet passage again. You let your voice climb 2 rungs so everyone can hear. You do not preach. You say it like a price. The man steps aside. He looks like a beef who lost to a rope for the first time. A bell jangles from an elbow at the edge of the ring. It is loud because it has been waiting to be heard. Heads turn. Children point. The woman wearing it stares at her hand like it belongs to a stranger. You realize she tied it to herself to save time with the baker. You hate the bell in that minute more than you hate the porter's counterfeit. The bell tells a crowd to feel right. Your badge tells them to think. Your first fine felt like offense. Your second will feel like rain. You do not collect it. You take the bell instead and lay it on the plank by the beetle's drum. You write a small sentence in the corner of your board for inspection. The beetle looks at the bell like it might jump. He likes rules when they have handles. The fog lifts a little and shows you the bridge crowded at the edges with faces that will not come closer. The city always grows more eyes when tin shines. You wipe the board with your sleeve because your hand is damp and you pretend it is the fog's fault. The apothecary sells a packet to a man who will pretend it solved a thing it did not. The hedge priest touches the chords again and coins find his palm again. The brotherhood changes the empty basket for a full one with the neatness of men who practice careful. The beetle's drum draws a rhythm that tells the second half hour what to be. You escort an old mason whose hands are tried sandstone. He taps his clapper once against his thigh like you would nudge a dog. The miller coughs the cough of a man who wants your attention and says, "Show me your seal." You show it. He nods as if that is a professional courtesy. He then tries to sell the mason a loaf at twice price. You fine him a slice of pride and the amount for 2 bells. He pays with a huff. The mason winks under his linen, and you remember that dignity can survive often enough to be a problem for tyrants. A watchman shifts his baton from left to right. That is all the warning you get when a knot of boys tries to run the rope for the thrill. A fishwife reaches out and grabs a collar. The boy chokes, laughs, apologizes, and gives back the eel he did not manage to steal. The rope holds. You do not have to shout. The boys wander off to brag about failing. The woman in green catches your eye across 2 stalls and a salted barrel. She does not move. She makes a face like a question that accepts any answer. You lift the board a hair. She nods the nod that says she will return at noon and bring a word you can use as a lever. The bellman starts his list. He calls the sick and the dead as if they are all simply names on a string. He does not say households when he can say persons. He protects markets with grammar. The sound lays itself over the ring, and everything you do becomes both smaller and more useful. You escort the last of the first hour. You hold the rope between a woman and a man who always stood too near when he did not have to. You remind a guild beadle of the line between enforcement and theater. He blinks as if surprised the line exists. When the hour concludes, the rope breathes. You walk the rim and nod to stalls that did not make trouble. You write a small plus beside a charcoal seller who kept his mouth closed when he wanted to open it. You write a small minus by the baker and then scratch half of it out because he learned. The vinegar rag has warmed against your nose and the smell turned from punishment to background. The tanners laugh again. You will smell them in your soup later. The woman in green returns as promised. The crowd has thinned to a safer shape. You take her to the ward door. The beadle watches as if that were his job. Your supervisor waits with a quill that has seen enough rooms. You say the sentence that moves such things. Respited for a week, market only, bells optional, badge visible, escort required. Your supervisor scratches it down and blots it as if ink were law. The beadle coughs and then chooses to say nothing. You tie the cord again, high and clean. She lifts her chin with the smallest bravery. You walk her to the bread row one last time. A baker sets out a loaf without looking at her wrists. That counts as a victory. If you can tolerate small victories, you can. The fishwife does not swing her knife like punctuation. The miller refrains from saying, "Show me your seal," because he finds a new customer to bully. The apothecary sells you a 2nd rue packet for free and claims he always liked you. You do not tell him you prefer numbers to compliments. The hour after becomes ordinary. The rope becomes a line again, not a miracle. The badges clink like low bells when they knock against buttons, and you do not wince anymore. The guild beadles count their morning by how many times they got to point. You count by how few times you had to write the word rescinded. You write admitted in a tidy row. You write rebuked twice when the baker forgets how to be new. You write respited for rain once because a cloud borrowed the bridge. By the time the sun finds the edges of the stalls and turns tin into little moons, you have escorted 16 bearers, tied 9 badges that will live the week, cut 2 cords that were tied by wrong hands, fined 3 stalls, and written 26 tiny marks that would bore a poet and build a city. The beadle's drum rests like a sleepy heart. The Brotherhood's basket shows wicker. The hedge priest has stopped pretending and sells blessings at a 2-for-1 under his breath. The apothecary promises brimstone is out of season and smiles at his window anyway. You finish the last escort with a boy who tries to pretend he does not need you. He does. You walk beside him without making the walking a lesson. He reaches the bread row, takes his measure, and runs a hand across the badge as if checking whether it will surely hold till next time. You say it will if we all pretend that it does. He laughs because that sentence is the first honest thing he has heard since his skin changed. If you made it this far, tell me later in the comments whether you would enforce the new bell rule or live by the older quiet. Would your street choose badge, bell, or both? Where are you watching from? I read those and sometimes steal your better words. You close the pouch of badges with a thumb that has learned where the leather goes loose. You hang the board on its nail. You wash your hands in vinegar and do not ask the water to forgive you. The gate closes a little for dinner. The rope lays slack. The stalls keep breathing because that is what stalls know how to do when nobody tells them otherwise. You stand by the gate and let your eyes count the tiny proofs that the hour worked. Bread in baskets that it would not have found, coins in ladles that would have stayed under straw, a baker who learned a new habit, a fishwife who stopped at slap, a miller who failed at a scheme, a child who will not yank a stranger's ribbon again. You walk the edge of the ring one more time before the bellman climbs his crate. The bridge sheds its fog. The river shows the color it always was when men stopped telling it their news. You pass the apothecary and he offers a discount. You shake your head. He says rue keeps bad smells from biting. You do not argue that it is people, not smells, who bite. You want him on your side again tomorrow. You pass the hedge priest and he blesses your hands for free. He is human enough to want to be noticed for the one thing he did not price. At the Lazar house gate, you set the pouch and the board on the plank and rest your wrist on the wood. The beadle enters your counts with a pen that could carve beef. Your supervisor asks what you think about the bell rule. You say it teaches the crowd to feel right instead of act right. He nods once. The nod says, write that in the margin of the next council paper. You promise yourself you will try. Behind the door, the brotherhood hums while they slice. They do not sing. Singing would sound like a claim. Humming sounds like keeping time. A boy somewhere taps a clapper against his thigh in a rhythm that will be the whole city soon. The baker and the fishwife cross themselves in opposite directions without meaning to. The miller hides his sign behind a sack and tells his apprentice to tell anyone who asks that the rule was only for this morning. You sit. You untie your rag and breathe the air the tanners left you. It is honest air. It does not pretend. You are a gate clerk and an escort and a knotter and a witness. You have a week of passes to tie and a dozen men to disappoint, and a beadle to argue with, and a supervisor to persuade, and a council to trouble with sentences that are too short to ignore. You will do it again tomorrow, because the hour works only if it repeats. You look at your hands and count what they carried and what they refused. A bell, a badge, a fake on silk, a fine written in pencil lines that became behavior, a woman's week, a boy's rope, a baker's habit, a fishwife's patience, a market that learned for an hour to be better than its fear. The bellman lifts his list. The noon noise stands. You listen to hear if any of the names are yours. You listen to the space after each name for the sound that tells you your hour mattered. You do not get that sound. You do not need it. You have little marks in a ledger that will sit on a plank long after the crowd goes home. You put your thumb on one of them and press until the wood remembers. The rope falls. The world moves. You stand and tie your knots again. The rope teaches manners if you let it. One ring at the cord, show the badge at the cordon, keep a staff's length, never haggle loud. You practice the steps until your feet know them better than your mouth. If watching how pity becomes policy in real time is your kind of trouble, tap subscribe and ring the bell. Today we work a truce that keeps food moving with the least amount of shouting, and then we see how a counterfeit tries to buy itself a piece. You start at the board with a chalk nub and a breath that remembers vinegar. Draft the rota. Eastgate first while the fish come in slippery and loud. Bread row in alternating twos so the baker can't pretend he didn't see. Grain later, after the guild stewards finish inventing rule words. Colored cords, red for escort, tied high at the shoulder so everyone can read your promise, yellow for bread first, knotted to the badge cord where a seller's eye lands. You hold each linen strip for a second so the knots lie like they mean it. Verbs matter, so you pick them now before the day tries to steal your grammar. Admitted for the obvious, rebuked when a stall learns slow, rescinded when a badge tries to be a passport into arguments, respited for rain because rain makes even decent people cruel, and will try to call itself a reason. Your handwriting unlocks stalls or shuts the rope, and the watch reads every letter like fence posts, on a path they did not choose. The watch circles, baton to armpit, measuring the distance between city and panic. The phrase, "King's peace within the ring," picks up splinters when it's said too often. You check the hourglass anyway and call the first name. A man with white scars and a better hat than yesterday steps forward. You tie the red escort cord and walk, staff out, pacing the line you are allowed to claim. He buys onions with a nod and a swallow. He keeps the staff's length because you do, because that's how it works. Your supervisor glides in the way bees do when they think you forgot a flower. "Truce at market, separation on the road," he hisses, and the hiss has learned to be a rule. "We'll keep them slow inside the rope," he says, and quiet outside it. You nod because nodding uses fewer words than agreement. The first trouble arrives on schedule and smells like someone else's soap. A healthy porter in a blue hood shoulders a basket that isn't his and shows a badge that pretends to be yours. Crisp tin, blue silk, no parish stamp. He swears his sister's sick. His eyes are tired in the wrong way. The grain steward appears from the exact place he could claim he didn't. Ringers, he says, loud enough to test the crowd, soft enough to deny. Your Lazar house is dumping ringers to dodge dues. He flexes the word dues like it's a muscle. You hold out your palm, and the porter drops the badge into it with a confidence he didn't borrow. You touch the face and the edge. Your stamp leaves a tiny burr where the die is old. This one is slick as vanity. You tilt it toward the light, and it reflects your own ragged breath back at you. False. You could call watch and be right. You could let him pass and be kind. Both will earn you a follower later. A fishwife slaps a hand away from her eels with the economy of a woman doing math in her head. A miller whispers, "Show me your seal," to a real badge bearer, like the phrase pays a bill. You slip the counterfeit into your pouch without saying the word. Your sister's name, you ask the porter, and he gives you one that is on none of your lists. He adds a street that doesn't exist unless you count memories. You take his basket by the handle and he does not fight you. He says, "Please," in a voice that would win if it were a vote. You point him out of the ring with your chin and hand the basket to a woman whose scars have their own patience. The steward smiles like a man who just watched a knot take. You write rebuked for the grain stall that tried a cough noise instead of honesty, and put a small mark beside admitted for the woman who accepted the basket without flourish. The watch lamp crawls closer in the company of a man who can make lantern light look like law. The porter fades. The steward says helpful in a tone that means the opposite. Your ink bottle tips when a passing elbow decides you need a new problem. A blot falls into the ledger like a stone into clear water. A name drowns. 6 becomes 8, and 8 looks like a man you do not want standing in the middle of a rope with everybody watching. You swap 2 passes while the watch lamp climbs your collar. Right badge to right arm, right name to right cord. Your handwriting remembers to be certain before your stomach does. A friar arrives with a sealed note and breath that says he ate better than you did. From the alderman, he says, tucking it into your palm as if he had done you a favor. It is waxed with a private seal that got tired last winter. You slip it under the plank without reading, because if the alderman needed your eyes at dawn, they would have sent law, not parchment. The friar lingers to bless badge cords with a thumb that will cost later if anyone remembers how to count. You nod him into usefulness and move. The bellman's noon list of the sick taking shape at the corner puts heaviness into the air. People walk slower by habit when they smell their name incoming. You let that heaviness do half your work. The rope becomes a lullaby if you hold the note steady. Bread doles lower by pole ladle from windows, rope around a ladle handle, vinegar-washed coin clinking like a cheap hymn. You collect a fine at a stall where the baker decided the bell rule was a new game. Amercement, you write, the way a man writes a shopping list when he knows he can afford it. The baker pays in loaves. You let him think that's victory. Because corruption is shy until it is caught, you find the stash by accident. A tin edge peeks from under a fishboard, light flirting with metal. You lift the plank and there it is. Blank discs, unstamped, a tidy stack hugged by a ribbon stolen from someone richer. The fishwife watches you not move your face. "For trinkets," she says too fast. "Kids, saints, whatever sells." You show her one real badge, then let the blank kiss it, edge to edge so everyone can hear the difference. Tellers can hear coin, you can hear tin. You slide the blanks into a sack with a practiced hand and whisper later to your supervisor. He hisses twice. You mark the fish stall with a tiny knot that you don't explain to anyone. A forged opened by order chit shows up like a stray dog. Poorly cut parchment, wrong ink, delicate script that overeager hands teach themselves. The beadle, who carries no music until he does, hums a satisfied line. "Ours doesn't curl like that," he says, and he is right. You log the forgery and pass him the note to feed the small fire he isn't supposed to be keeping under the plank. The beadle wears a second, secret slate inside his coat like a rib. You catch it in a moment when he reaches for a quill. 3 names spared. The cousin of a councilman whose wife doesn't like the look of cords. a wine wife with better friends than rules, a silk worker who pays early and never stands in daylight. The slate could be nothing. The slate could be the map of why the rope sometimes looks longer than it is. You file the look in your pocket. You do not steal the slate. Yet, you begin to see the market's choreography as if somebody drew chalk lines and hired you to manage them. A watchman measures distance with his baton and sets his jaw at 3 elbows worth. The phrase "King's Peace within the ring" turns into a drum roll, and you learn to read it the way you read faces. The bread row learns to set loaves down like decisions. The tanners laugh at jokes that smell like their work, and you decide that laughter can be honest even if air is not. The porter with the crisp fake returns with different eyes. He picked an ally who did not practice mercy. The grain steward trails him with 3 men who learned their stride in a yard built for hitting boys. They suggest process. They suggest counsel. They suggest the Lazar house is a bin of excuses. Your supervisor shows up with a padlock in one hand and a scroll in the other and a face that says choose correctly without naming a direction. Truce at market. Separation on the road. You hear the rule as if it were your own tongue. You choose the rope over the road. Bring her here, you say to the porter, meaning his sister, meaning his lie. Inside the ring where the king's peace counts for something, the steward hears only the first part and steps toward the rope, as if wanting to taste the word inside. He stops when the watchman makes the baton look accidental across his chest. The porter looks like a man who did not plan for somebody else to call his bluff kindly. He nods. He does not return. That is a choice, too. A boy who thinks you don't see him slides under the rope with a tin disc between his teeth. You clamp the staff down in front of his knees, and he freezes with a gust of breath that is not entirely his. Who taught you, you ask? He points with his chin because his tongue has obligations. You switch the disc out for a bread-first chord and whisper, "We tie our lies better," in a way that makes the fishwife snort. She is your choir on the days you don't get one. Rain pecks the plank. You add respited for rain after a small argument with your better angels. The watch lamp moves like a slow thought. The bellman warms his throat on the corner. The friar with the sealed note tries to look like a hero and fails by 3 inches. You think about reading the letter and decide against it because power rarely writes to you when it wants a conversation. At the mid-stretch, an alderman's boy arrives with a hat too big and a request too loose. "We need the yellow cords," he says, "for guests who prefer quiet to bells." You show him the knot that makes yellow do what it is supposed to. You do not offer ribbon. He puffs himself up with a breath he did not earn, and says the word decree as if it would pay for bread. You write rebuke next to his empty basket, and he does not understand what the letters will do to his noon. By 3rd bell, the truce runs on its own legs. Bread goes to mouths, coin goes to ladles. Amercements slide into the beetle's tally like teeth into the right slots. The rope becomes background. Your staff becomes an opinion no one bothers to test. Then the counterfeit decides it's losing and needs a scene. Blue silk flashes at the edge of the grain row. The porter's friend, taller than the lie, appears with a second crisp disc and hands like a man who can lift anything except shame. He aims his body between you and the rope, and the grain steward smiles with more teeth than usual. He wants public. He wants chanting. He wants a story to tell later about weakness in the morning. You move without speed because speed writes itself as guilt. Staff sideways. Board forward. Voice flat. Badge, you say. Stamp, you add. Name, you finish. He hands you the disc. You tilt it and let the crowd see the smooth. You take your own from your pouch and let the burr sing against the blue. Metal talks when it needs a friend. The silence becomes useful. The steward finds a different row of teeth. The porter's friend taps the disc as if knocking makes it true. "Sister," he starts, and the fishwife interrupts with the kind of laugh that ends arguments. "Sister doesn't buy grain," she says. "Sister buys bread." The watchman lifts the baton out of habit and decides not to move it. The boys at the rope, who usually run for fun, stare like men who learned something by accident. The alderman's boy whispers decree again as if it could change shape. The friar decides he is late for somewhere else and goes. You find the verbs in your mouth like a tool belt. Rebuked for the stall that liked the drama. rescinded for the badge that tried to be a door, admitted for the woman who kept her lane while the men rehearsed. Your handwriting keeps the world from pretending the scene did not happen. News travels faster than carts in narrow streets. A man in a stained jerkin leans and mutters that your house is making itself important with little circles. You want to tell him importance isn't the point, quiet is. You say quiet instead. He blinks. Maybe he files the thought. Maybe he sells it later. The friar's sealed note finds you again by way of the beadle, who likes paper when it can be counted. You open it at last. 3 lines of alderman Latin that add up to nothing. A stamped flourish. A suggestion to be prudent. You laugh with no voice and tuck it under your plank to hold the corner down. A fish scale sticks to your cuff and makes the letter smell more honest than it is. At the far end, the tanners start a joke you can finish because you've heard it 3 times this week already. You don't. You are counting breath, yours, theirs, the ropes. Rain threatens, then reconsiders. You tie 2 yellow cords in a row because the baker learned he likes bread first, even when it isn't raining. He pretends to be efficient. He is. You are not mad about it. The porter's 3rd try arrives disguised as help. A woman with no badge and a basket from a house you know tries to join the bread line with a quiet face. You say name and she gives you a fake that would trick a better man. You hand her a yellow cord and whisper, "You're carrying for him," and she drops her eyes the way mirrors do when they don't want work. "He said my boy could have the scraps," she says. You walk her to the rope and slip the basket to a woman who has the scar as the answer. On the way back, you give the first woman a comfort you can afford. "Come at day's end," you say, "and we'll see if scraps remain." She believes you because people who run out of other choices keep believing. By last bell, the market truce feels like the law it pretends to be. The bellman reads the sick list, and the square holds itself still. The grain steward watches from the safe side with his men politely behind him, which is a miracle too small to brag about. The watch changes hands and doesn't show it. A child touches a badge and isn't dragged back because the mother learned that pointing and explaining works better when the city is looking. Your supervisor surfaces with a nod that equals pay today and work tomorrow. "You have to write it," he says, and you know he means the counterfeit tale in a hand that can survive the cousin's reading. You write it the way water keeps its own level. Badge smooth, stamp false, man healthy, basket borrowed, steward watching. Truce at market. Separation on the road. Enforced without shouting. Your pen finds the last line without asking you first. Mercy in public is cheaper than private cruelty. You leave the sentence simple because simple lives longer. You undo 2 knots for men who tied bells to themselves to save arguing. You put the bells on the plank and label them inspection. The beadle nods as if bells were fish hammers. The hedge priest stops selling and starts blessing again because your eyes found him. The Brotherhood of St. Lazarus swaps empty baskets for full ones, with the wonder of men who've lost taste for surprise. When the crowd thins to a thought you can hold in one hand, you walk the ring and fix small things. A stake that leaned, a cord that learned to knot itself uselessly, a board that wobbled the wrong way. You put your signature on the quiet with actions so modest even the rope has to lean in to see them. You find a stall with a look and a number. You forgive a boy with a shrug and a nod. You rebuke the alderman's runner with a sentence he can repeat to his boss without losing his hat. The grain steward catches your shoulder, as if requesting a dance. "You'll regret not letting him through," he says, meaning the porter, meaning the story he wanted. If regret is priced in coin, you answer, "Send the bill to the alderman." He laughs without humor and thinks about making you interesting to someone who enjoys names. He will. That is tomorrow's chore. You do not make a note of it. Half your job is forgetting the right things. The beadle closes the box where padlocks sleep. You glimpse the second slate again where 3 spared names wink like coins that didn't pay. You consider the space between theft and record. You choose record. "I saw a slate," you say to your supervisor later, when the rope is a loop hanging on a nail. He does not ask which name. He asks who else looked. "Nobody," you say, and that is a different kind of truth. The porter passes you at the edge of the bridge, with a face that has decided what kind of man it wants to be next. He will try the south gate tomorrow with thicker silk, or he will stop trying because the fishwife's laugh did damage. You do not cheer either possibility. You walk the long way around because either way somebody will follow you home. At the Lazar house door, the board goes back on its hook like a shield after drill. Your hand smells like tin and chalk, only some of it yours. The friar's letter keeps the plank level because that is what it is good for. Your supervisor slices bread into squares for the brotherhood, as if bread didn't keep better when you leave it alone. You thread leftover cords through your fingers and feel the day there, the soft bite of linen that kept strangers from acting like wolves. Later, when the bellman reads again, and you stop hearing yourself breathe, the fishwife slips you a wrapped eel end as payment for not making her explain what everybody saw. The miller's sign about bells has been folded small and hidden under a sack. The baker whistles 3 notes of a tune he didn't know last week. The watchman nods and forgets what your name is, which is a skill you should teach your enemies. You sit on the step and copy the day with verbs: admitted, rebuked, rescinded, respited for rain. You add one you didn't plan to learn, remembered. Because markets learn, and then they teach you back. The rope is a thing you hung, but the truce belongs to people who decided to behave as if they liked each other for an hour. That is the kind of justice that always arrives wearing quiet. Tell me in the comments whether you would have let the porter through to avoid making a scene, or stopped him to keep the truce from collapsing, and whether your town would spend better on a rope or a bell. I read them, even when the day says I shouldn't. Mid-morning fog thins to a smear of milk over the rope, and then she is there, wrapped and calm, hands bare like truth, scars the color of old paper. The midwife from the outskirts moves as if the city is a house she knows in the dark. Her badge dangles on a cord with a knot you recognize as yours, but the seal is last week's shine. Expired yesterday. She lifts it with 2 fingers, a polite ghost of a bell. Not the elbow, she says before you ask. It tells husbands not to call me. The rope remembers it is a wall. Neighbors reel in closer without moving their feet. Someone whispers that crossing her will starve the whole lane of courage. Someone else says the word blessed like a dare. The councilman's cousin peels out of the throng with good cloth and bad timing. I'll hold the cordon, he says, smile polished, promise free. The surgeon at the trestle, sleeves rolled and eyes salt-bitter, mutters black charms and old science look the same to a frightened crowd. Pick your noun and stick to it. He sets a boy on the bench and feels for a pulse with 2 fingers that have learned to take insults. The chapel rings 1 sanctuary bell just once, a silver coin dropped on stone. The beadle answers with his drum, 2 flat taps and a third that means double fines if you make him pick up a pen. The rope breathes in, and then the market holds its breath the way people do when they hear water quicken under ice. You put your palm to the badge to feel what time has done to it. Yesterday, it was permission. Today, it is a question. Your kit is a plank and a pouch and the damp cloth that keeps wax from cracking when you run it from ward house to rope. Your supervisor hisses, audible only to you. Truce at market, separation on the road, and then he vanishes into the edge, where rules turn into witnessing. 2 breaths, the midwife says, and it's a request and an order and an assessment of your character. She ties a yellow cloth through her sash. Provisions due. She is telling you how to write the next 3 lines, that she will take bread first, finish second, and leave without sermon. You nod once because anyone can nod. You run because running is what your job is. The ward house eats you and gives you back different. Hot wax in the ladle, seal warmed and wicked into the press, damp cloth turned once to keep the green from clouding. You cradle the heat like a secret you do not approve of. The alley makes a long throat of shade. The market ahead is a living thing that will decide how it feels about you by the time you reach the rope. If the crowd sees the damp cloth, they'll know you're resetting rules on the fly. If the cousin's cousin sees it, he will call it favor and send someone to follow you home. If the surgeon sees it, he will call it tool and add it to his kit with an unspoken thanks. You curl the cloth inward, a flower hiding its pollen, and step into the light with a face that tries to be a door. The herald's trumpet blades the rising sound into ribbons. King's peace within the ring, he cries, the line kept shiny by use. The sheriff's deputy plants the mace by the trestle with a thud that says later we argue, now we behave. Quicklime flashes white on a spit mark, hissing like arguments that didn't get their chance. The priest arrives in a wind of frankincense and worry, warning against talismans sewn under bodices, voice trimmed to fit public ears. The wise woman ghosts your elbow and presses a fold of black silk into your palm. Keeps breath steady, she says, not with superstition, with muscle memory. You do not look at it. You put it in your ledger at the corner where you write things that work and must be called something else. The cousin's cousin steps into the space your staff is supposed to own. Wave her through, he stage whispers, as if generosity were a show. I'll hold the cordon. He means, I'll own this favor in 4 directions. The surgeon doesn't look up. Device, he mutters, echoing your newer habit. Call it a device. Spare me charms. You speak through the rope the way you speak through keyholes. Badge expired yesterday, you say to the midwife. And the rope hears the word yesterday and relaxes an inch, because yesterday is a door you can still open. Temporary pass, you add, market only. Escort. Yellow first. You hold your plank like a shield and your wax like a confession. She lifts her chin. Do the part with the seal, she says. Not because I need it, because they do. Her eyes flicker toward the baker, the grain steward, the miller who has learned to say, show me your seal without moving his lips. She watches your hand. You lift the press. You work fast, flawless, the way you practiced when the beetle counted your breath and your errors. Green puddles, horseman stamps, circle cools. The crowd doesn't gasp because you didn't let them see the damp. You take 3 steps to keep the act from looking like a plea. The rope tries to be a snake. The cousin's cousin hisses. Move. He means make a choice big enough to cast a shadow on him. You choose the smallest choice that works. You tie the red escort cord high at her shoulder. You set the yellow cloth visible on the badge cord like a flag that only sellers can read. You do not touch her elbow. You walk the staff's length ahead, and the ring opens like a good throat. At the bread row, the baker fumbles honest. He's already been taught once today. He sets down a loaf with a sigh he learned to make sound like fairness. The midwife pays with vinegar-washed coin and eye contact. This for 3 houses, she tells you without looking, and you nod as if you are a ledger. A boy lowers a pole ladle from a window, and the rope creaks when the weight finds it. You want the whole city to agree to live inside that sound. Behind you, the herald's trumpet cuts a fresh swell of voices into compliant pieces. The beetle taps his drum hard enough to remind men how fines feel. The deputy lays a hand on the mace to tell the rope that iron is here if it needs to remember its place. The priest says the word compassion as if he rented it. The grain steward says the word dues like it is his password to heaven. On the surgeon's bench, a woman pants through her teeth. 4 fingers, not 5, he says gently, and the boy beside her blushes because numbers still embarrass him. The surgeon glances once. Are you done? Almost. You pass the apothecary. He swears door knockers dusted with ground quicklime burn the next hand that touches and that this is good science, not bad magic. You say device and he smirks because he likes the new word if it sells. The cousin's cousin keeps pace at the rim, performing the look of holding the cordon while his men do nothing except learn who nods to whom. This could have been simpler, he says behind his smile. You answer, simpler is when we bury babies, and watch him fumble for a laugh and not find one. At the butcher's corner, a shout rises, rough with courage that borrowed beer. The herald answers with his trumpet, and the shout discovers it wasn't a shout, only a cough. The sheriff's deputy moves his mace half an inch. The rope smooths its back. You walk the midwife to the grain because you won't send her to the baker twice and tell husbands to be cruel without meaning to. The steward essays a clever face and asks for the seal. You show it with 2 fingers the way you'd offer someone a fruit you can't afford to share. He cannot object in public without admitting the rules he helped write are for show. He bows like a man folding a map and later promising to draw a better one. Stop, the midwife says suddenly. Not to you, to air. She crouches in the path and takes a hand that you had not noticed reaching from the crowd for her skirt. A girl stands there, taut as wire, eyes fixed on a place where pain has learned geometry. The midwife presses the girl's own hand to her belly. 2 breaths, she orders, the same words she used on you. The surgeon materializes like a sensible prayer. Between them, the act becomes a device, a cloth, a count, a whisper into the girl's ear that you cannot hear and do not need to. The lane exhale begins. Courage returns to people in small bowls. It is a show, yes, and a treatment, also yes, and for the first time since dawn, nobody stares at your staff. The priest tries to make the sign of the cross large, then chooses small because even priests learn staging. Mercy, he says, softer is useful. He looks at you. He means usefulness will be your defense later, when men with hats write letters. The cousin's cousin has grown impatient with not being the subject. Enough, he announces to the day. Let the markets move. He is right for the wrong reasons. You move, you do not hurry. The midwife rises with the neat authority of someone who owns her joints. She ties the yellow cloth tighter across the badge cord. Provisions due, she says to no one and everyone. The baker hears, the water ladle hears, the rope hears. You take her back into air that belongs to weather again. At the rope, a man tries to make his fear into a rule. Belle, he says, pointing to his elbow. The midwife holds up her hands. Pale scars, steady fingers. This tells husbands not to call me, she repeats. You want to be the man who makes them die of pride. He does not. The cousin's cousin performs a last offering. Next time, ask me first, he says, trying to be the wall that kept you safe. You write 4 words on your slate where he can see them if he knows letters. King's peace within ring. He squints and pretends he reads Latin better than he does. He retreats with the calm of someone who expects to be thanked later for a thing he witnessed. You have 1 act left. It is the one the crowd will remember. You step to the ward plank and press the temporary pass against the fresh seal in public view. You say, market only, 1 hour, escort required, like catechism. You do not say the part about until the aldermen make up their minds. You do not say the part about until the guild writes a rule that costs someone else. You say the part that keeps the rope smooth and the bread row honest. A runner from the council arrives with a sheet and a face, main prize and sureties to reopen the rope if panic returns, he explains to nobody's satisfaction. Fines doubled during tumult. The sheriff's deputy nods at the paper as if the mace enjoys the company. You sign the receipt and learn a script you will be required to say later in a room where men eat and call it policy. On your way back to the trestle, the wise woman pinches your wrist, just where pulse becomes information, and slides the black silk ribbon from your ledger, then tucks it into the midwife's sash with the sleight that women use when they were not asked permission to be useful. Device, you say aloud, so the priest hears you call it the word that won't burn. The beetle drums once more, and the hour loses its sharp edge. The trumpet rests. The market discovers that walking is still how you get places. You escort the midwife to the edge. She pauses and looks at you with the look that finishes raising people other people started. You used the seal for their eyes, she says. Good. Her gaze flicks across your kit, plank, cord, staff, a damp cloth that is no longer damp. Next time, do it sooner. Then she has gone into the outskirts where bells do not carry and hands do. You write device in your book where you might have written charm last year. You write admitted where you could have written rescued. You write respited under the baker's name with a tiny curl that means new habit holding. You write rebuked beside the grain steward's row because he tried for sport and lost. You do not write the cousin's cousin. You do not give him a noun to fling later. At the ward house, the sheriff's deputy asks you to repeat your phrasing for the noon council. Market only, 1 hour, escort, seal. He points at the mace and says the quiet part. If they balk, I'll call breach of the peace and break their sanctuary. You bring the words that make it unnecessary. You nod because you preferred the trumpet to the mace today. You always will. He reads your face like a map. Good, he says. Maps keep men from pretending they're the first to get lost. You set the seal back on its tray and breathe a breath you didn't earn. The beadle counts padlocks with the contentment of a man adding sheep. The friar sniffs at the air like he can smell policy cooling. The apothecary wraps 3 rue packets for people who cannot afford other science. The surgeon washes his hands longer than pride permits and pretends the water is thinking with him. The wise woman folds her ribbon and hums the tune that holds pulse steady. You step back into the ring with the staff low and the plank tucked and a face that is suddenly older. If you're still with me, tell me later in the comments whether you would have waved her through without the seal and dared the guild to shout, or barred her and paid in fire, and whether your town would call the silk a device or a sin. I read them when the rope goes slack. The sanctuary bell counts once more, a tiny mercy stamped on daylight. The rope, having learned its new manners, behaves as if it always knew them. The market decides to remember this as a day when quiet did the heavy lifting. You decide to stand where the yellow cloth can be seen and let your silence mean, look how we lived through this without inventing a tyrant to help. Night eats the edges of the market until torches draw shaky circles no bigger than a man's reach. Gates are barred and sulk under iron. Guilds stand in knots with cudgels leaned like spare bones, their faces set to, "I told you so." Under the grandstand, the counting house swallows candlelight and coughs it back as policy. Your beadle taps the plank twice with his stick, a schoolmaster's mercy. Copy fair, copy fast, copy flawless. If slipping inside the room where fear becomes a paragraph is your thing, tap subscribe and ring the bell. This is the hour when a badge turns into a tax receipt and quiet is priced per head. The council's draft lies on the plank like a patient who will recover if no one says the wrong word. General grace for all quiet passage within the rope it begins, in exchange for amercements paid at the chest and a levy of men at the king's pleasure. The phrases carry their own furniture. You square the parchment, wet your nib, and start translating panic into the alphabet. Save treachery, you write. Save malice, aforethought. Save brawls begun at bells. Your quill hisses the way arguments hiss when they are being turned into something you can stack. Tallies of amercements lie in bundles bound by twine, notches catching candle like a row of teeth. Recognizances wait their X's, awkward like men lacing shoes with the wrong hand. Ward padlocks sit in a tidy line, enameled mouths shut, hungry for future certainty. Rosemary and brimstone smoke share the air with ink. The mixture smells like someone trying to bless a ledger. The pest cart complains 2 alleys away. Its wheels squeal a grief you can schedule. Your beadle's cough stations itself behind your shoulder at the worst line. He wants you to copy the clause about fees at the king's pleasure without blinking. You copy it without blinking. He relaxes by half a cough. Sand lifts the wet from your letters. You blow the grit the way you'd shoo a child back to bed. The words go matte and mean it. Outside the counting house flap, a flare blooms near the armorer's lean-to, orange climbing old timber like it paid for the right. You and 2 boys run before anyone calls you brave. Buckets appear with that second sense crowds get around fire. Wet wool hisses on embered planks, the sound of a lesson being learned again. The boys grunt in a rhythm that teaches your heart to behave. The crowd holds its breath because flame teaches obedience. You throw until the flame sulks, spits, and finally agrees to be tomorrow's smell. Back at the plank, your hands forget to shake. A coin lands on the wood with a ring like a tired bell. The midwife's oldest patient, linen patched, jaw set, sets down her only round of silver and gives you 5 words she boiled down from a whole life. Save her from the bell. Not a speech, not a plea, a purchase order in a language you can write. The beadle's cough turns into a judgment. The cousin's steward doesn't look, which means he is. The sheriff's eyes do that small thing he uses to mean I saw. You hold your quill over the line where a clause could be spliced like a smuggled fish. Save the midwife from the bell. 5 words that would drag 1 door out of a net and invite 20 more to fake a limp. You count to 3. You count to 3 again because the astrologer outside has shoved the lucky hour forward, clouds thickening like lies. You copy the proclamation straight. Your refusal is neat enough to admire and hate. The patient doesn't snatch her coin back. She pushes it closer, a payment for you writing a sentence somewhere else later when you can. Under the dice tent, men with the cousin's livery lift a trap as politely as guilt allows. Bribes count themselves in the dark. Pouches thud. Coin breathes through linen. The trapdoor shuts and is dusted flat with a gambler's palm. You write nothing, you remember everything. The priest arriving from the chapel and the sheriff planted by the mace immediately begin their argument that has been waiting since your 3rd breath today. Sanctuary, says the priest, a noun with edges. Realm's safety, says the sheriff, a noun with teeth. The priest offers Latin. The sheriff offers a countersign that breaks sanctuary and riot manifest, in council's sight. They both glance at you because your line breaks cost less than theirs. You bend your head and do the work that never shouts and always decides. You make duplicates like a press that learned to breathe. 1 for the sheriff, 1 for the priest, 1 for the guildmaster whose cudgel leans against his shin like a faithful dog. You leave the escape hatches you learned to leave, save treachery, save malice aforethought, save knives drawn unprovoked. The drum finds a proclamation cadence under your breath. It is time to read the city into obedience. The beadle taps your elbow with a paper like a knife held flat. A marginal note from the steward's side. Keep this quiet. A whisper pretending to be statute. A lock without a keyhole. You could copy it into the margin and make it law for anyone who can afford to know it exists. You let the ink bead on your nib and drink itself back. Omitted forever. Your beadle's cough approves. The sheriff's quiet approves. The steward decides not to notice in public. The guild pleads at the gate, not loud, not yet. Their master stands on a barrel and lends his chest. We'll pay, he says, and march, he adds, because the levy line is not going away, and remember, he finishes, because that is the one verb they own. A riot is waiting 2 steps behind the plea if the terms dance wrong. You hear the square test its footing. You take the proclamation to the edge and read. Trumpets prick the air, drums lay a road you can walk without looking. Grace for all quiet passage within the rope, you say, and you taste the word grace like a coin with teeth. Fines at the chest, levy at the muster. You speak the exceptions loud enough to hurt. Save malice aforethought, save treachery, save knives drawn unprovoked. The crowd does the arithmetic in shoulders and decides the cost of being decent for a day. Back inside, a runner from the alderman flutters like a bird who can smell thunder. He hands you a folded line with a flourish he practiced in a mirror. Open by order, it says in a hand that is trying to grow up into government. You know the trick. You've seen it when cousins borrow seals. It asks to live in your margin. You starve it. The midwife's patient stands beside the plank as if holding up one wall. She does not repeat her 5 words. She knows that repeating makes beggars. She rests her finger on the coin without moving it, a woman teaching silver to wait. You write better than bells, she says, not for praise, for inventory. You consider the one contested name on the pass list, the wide-shouldered porter with crisp silk you caught this morning trying to dignify a counterfeit. He found a backer after lunch, someone with a hobby for loopholes. He will be written in if you allow the steward's slipstream to carry him. You weigh his name against the midwife's bell and the grain steward's smirk and the guild's memory. Your quill lifts, lowers, writes, rescinded, counterfeit exposed, steward warned. One name stays off, one bell stays off. You will be punished for at least one of those later. Wet wool still talks out by the armorer's lean-to. The boys bring their buckets back with the aimless pride of exhausted heroes. The Commissar kid leans into the tent flap and leaves you a posy of rue as if it were rent. Against bad airs, he says. You tuck it into your hood because superstition is cheaper than failure, and sometimes the only receipt the day accepts. The priest and the sheriff reach truce, the kind made of paper and fatigue, sanctuary preserved unless breach is manifest, in counsel's sight. The sheriff taps the mace as if it approves of adverbs. The priest blesses the clause with a small sign, saving the large one for when he needs to look like policy. The astrologer pokes his head in to declare the hour lucky if you stop talking. He shoves the lucky hour forward with his thumb when clouds thicken outside, then sells a charm to a man who calls it a device because he heard you say that word today and liked the way it made belief look dressed. You copy the final fare. Your hand keeps its temper even when your head wants rebellion. You tie thread through the holes, make the knot lie like a promise. The guildmaster arrives at your elbow without sorries. If the cousin buys exceptions under the dice, he says, "Sell mine here, on paper, so the crowd can price them." You don't write what he said. You write the list of stalls that behaved and the ones that need rebuke tomorrow, and you make sure the guilds are not all on one side of the ledger. Mercy must not look like a uniform. It must look like a habit. The beadle's cough returns when you reach the line where men become numbers, levy to be taken from within the rope, credited to obedience. Your stomach stiffens. Over yesterday's list of shut-ups, they will pin a muster sheet in the morning, and the rope that bought bread today will buy bodies tomorrow. You write it anyway, because that is the shape of honesty available to you in rooms with candles. A watcher from the cousin's household appears like an unnecessary stage direction. He places a livery badge on your plank as if setting down a saint you forgot to venerate. Mark more wisely, he says, which is kindness with a leash. The guildmaster arriving from the other side offers the sentence that always costs, sanctuary till the pest lifts. The sheriff offers nothing but the look. I saw. Your name will find someone's tally if you cross a house tonight. You do not tremble because trembling stains ink. The armorer's flare tries again out of spite, and you and the boys put it down with a combination of water and swearing that will be taught as liturgy if this keeps happening. The market holds its breath again, decides against drama, returns to the hum that says we're trying. The drum under the proclamation cadence rattles its little thunder. A herald clears his throat twice, and the square votes to remain a city. You take the pass list in both hands. One contested name. You see the silk, the smooth tin, the steward's grin echoing in blue. You see the midwife's palm, the yellow cloth, the coin waiting like a witness. You see the line you can add to the margin that would make it easy to tuck him in. You add nothing. You fold the list shut and let the stitch bite. Keep this quiet, the steward repeats, close enough for Clove to gate-crash your breath. You lay the fair copy of the proclamation over his phrasing and say it aloud to the room because sunlight is a disinfectant men will sometimes obey. General grace for all quiet passage within the rope, you read, voice public, fines at the chest, levy at the muster, exceptions as written. Your as written eats the whisper he wanted you to swallow. A boy with an ink-smudged mouth scrambles in with a proclamation board. He nails it to the post under the grandstand with the reverence of a sacristan. Your words look taller in candlelight. Men read them and behave not because they believe, but because behaving reads is cheaper tonight. The guild pays with coin that sounds like old oaths. The cousin pays with coin that sounds like future wars. The priest pays with a benediction he discounts by half. The sheriff pays with his back to you, shoulders square against the idea that iron can be graceful. The patient retrieves her coin only when you nod, and even then she leaves it on the plank a heartbeat longer, a ritual you may repeat tomorrow as proof you remember. You write better than bells, she says again, and this time she means it less and trusts it more. She turns away with her jaw working, and a gate that tells you he will not be buried because paper pretended to be mercy for one more day. The trap under the dice tent yawns and shuts a last time. The astrologer declares the hour lucky by definition because it did not kill us. The pest cart sings its iron vowel at the corner and goes on. The rosemary bundle in the brazier gives up its last green and becomes ash. The beetle closes his book with a pig-stabbing flourish. Your supervisor lays the seal back in its nest as if returning a child to a bed you do not yet deserve. If you're still with me, tell me later whether you would have slipped one name off the pass list with a flourish and lived under a patron's cloak, or copied the proclamation straight and let morning judge you with smaller knives. Where you're watching from decides which word you favor, erase, or obey. I read these when the fire sleeps. You carry the proclamation to the gate with the sheriff at your shoulder and the guild at your flank. You read it again under the torches. The drum keeps time. People hear grace and think of bread. People hear levy and think of someone else's son. People hear fines and find their purses with a prayer and a curse that sound the same from a distance. You finish, and the square exhales like a patient whose fever has agreed to wait for dawn. Back in the counting house, you choose your last small powers. The margin note stays unwritten. The contested name stays off the list. The bell clause stays where it belongs, in the air, not in law. You stack the duplicates and tie them with thread that proves you meant to. Under the plank, you push the steward's note until it surrenders its shape. In the beetle's coat, the secret slate scratches gently against fabric. 3 spared names being warmed by a body that tells itself it deserves warmth. You do not steal it tonight. You write, in your ledger where tiny marks learn to be teeth, 3 spared, seen file for morning. Torches gutter. The gate groans. The guildmaster knocks his cudgel once against wood and calls it even. The priest tests the hinge of sanctuary with a small prayer. The sheriff lifts the mace an inch and puts it down again. The cousin steward leaves the badge on your plank, a token that thinks it's a future. You leave it there, you tidy your ink, you sand the last line, you press your thumb against the word levy until the pulp remembers. Night breathes through the broken rafters by the armorer's lean-to. The boys sleep sitting up with buckets for pillows. The rope hangs slack like a serpent that is eaten and is trying to be good. You step outside to feel whether the air has pardoned you. It hasn't. Air rarely does. But the market is not loudly dying, and that counts. You look down the lane toward the dice tent's trap and know that men are counting there who do not know how to read. You look up toward the chapel and know that men are reading there who do not know how to count. You look at your plank and know you have done both today. The city will try to forget the price of the badge by breakfast. Your handwriting will remind it. The astrologer points at nothing and calls it a constellation. The pest cart pities its axle and goes looking for the next address. The rosemary ember stops pretending to be a plant. You tie the pouch of cords, cap the ink, and fold the proclamation around the new habit. Tomorrow someone will test a bell, and you will answer with a cord. Someone will test a counterfeit, and you will answer with a burr. Someone will test your margin, and you will answer with omission. Someone will bring a coin and 5 words, and you will answer with the smallest sentence that keeps a door from learning shame. You sleep with the smell of wet wool and rosemary and ink in your hair. You dream the rope holds because people decide to let it. You wake knowing the rope holds because someone wrote it so. Dawn unstitches the night with noisy thread. Trumpets wake their brass, drums test the skin, and the velvet-voiced herald climbs a crate and stretches his words until even the cats pretend to listen. His grace extends mercy to those who obeyed the mark. It lands like bread on a table and like chalk on a door at the same time. Badges gleam like small moons in the watery light. Bells stay quiet because last night you bought their silence with ink and breath and the small courage of not blinking. You stand at the rope with the pouch, the board, and the habit. Your hand smells of vinegar and rue. The beetle drums a soft cadence that says, "We'll pretend this is ordinary so long as no one tests the script." The brewer with the crisp counterfeit moves through the market like water finds low ground. Light on his feet and heavy with permission he did not earn. He strides free as air because somebody bought him wind. The midwife's lintel wears yellow instead of red, the knot tight as a sailor's prayer. The boy's mother folds to the cobbles without warning. Grief does that. It doesn't cue trumpets. 2 women catch her under the elbows and set her upright with the care used for a window pane. Across the rope, a merchant ties his apron and says the hour out of habit, blessings, though he means receipts. You carry paper like a man carries knives, duplicates for the sheriff first, because iron likes to be fed. He lays your copy beside the mace and gives you that narrow look that saves words I saw, duplicates for the coroner next, whose pen has written misadventure in a hand that's learning how to look sure. He sighs over the seal and calls it necessary without believing in the word. Duplicates for the guild last, because coin will wait until the man who scolds it shows up with a chest. The guildmaster reads the lines that mention fines and levy and nods like a man accepting a dent in a cartwheel. He strokes the claws save knives drawn unprovoked and leaves a thumbprint there, a little human grease to prove law has to be handled. Banners come down like tired lungs exhaling. Squires slack the rope and coil it as if it will behave tomorrow because it behaved today. Above yesterday's list of shut-ups, someone nails a fresh sheet that smells like cold ink and warmer orders. Muster for his grace's levy. Names start to sprout in the corners where brave finds shade. Boys posture taller. Men defer themselves until lunch. The page flutters in the breeze as if trying to read itself. You finally understand what all these badges bought. Not health, compliance, not cures. Lanes that move. Chests that groan into carts. A harvest of men promised for later, payable in coin and bodies. The rope wasn't a cure, it was a funnel. Coins clink in vinegar-washed ladles lowered from windows by rope. The sound is a cheap hymnal, a comfort paper taut. The last rosemary bundle smolders in the brazier near the ward door, smoke honest and thin, trying to smell like blessing and not like yesterday's fire. A cart's axle squeals at the square's edge, a note you already know by bone, the pest wagon turning a corner without introducing itself. The bellman clears his throat for the sick list, and the crowd silently rehearses how not to wince. The cousin steward peels out of the murmur like silk detaching from a hook. He sets a livery badge on your plank with a pleasant weight. Its enamel winks a sermon you've heard all week. Mark more wisely, he offers, and though he smiles, the pin points at your chest like a trained dog. The guildmaster waits near the well and does not smile at all. Sanctuary, he says, simple, undecorated. Till the pest lifts. His hands are empty. His hands are real. The sheriff does not bid, does not barter, does not bless. He just rests his fingers on the mace and lets his eyes do their small blade, I saw. The beetle coughs, a sound that's learned to schedule itself around decisions. You feel the secret slate in his coat like a second rib. The spared addresses the cousin's cousin, the door with silk instead of law, the friend of a friend who never seems to hear bells press a shape against your thoughts. Leak, burn, file. Your own name hovers lightly on somebody else's tally, a little row that can be called to account if your pen strays rogue. The herald reads mercy again, because repetition is policy's favorite spell. Men clap themselves into agreement. Women nod themselves into continuation. Children stare at the rope as if it is a tame animal. The brewer tips his cap at you, you do not nod back. The midwife's knot shows yellow without apology. The boy's mother slides the edge of her shoe along the cobble as if sharpening it. She looks up once and her eyes call you by your job, not your name. It is the right kind of rude. You move because standing still writes your decisions bigger. First, the sheriff, again, this time with the counterslip he ordered in midnight ink. Open on warrant, he had said for one door last night, and you wrote it in a hand designed not to wobble. He holds the slip at arm's length like a man reading a rumor he suspects is true. He does not say thank you. He does not need to. Iron chose not to speak today, you did. The coroner hands you a parchment that calls a midnight death misadventure. He says the word softly, not to make it gentler, but to keep it within the correct fence. This one fell, he explains. This one didn't want to, but physics keeps old promises. He tucks the paper away, and his thumb rubs the margin where ink has learned to live. The paper doesn't clean anything. It settles dust better than dirt. The guildmaster wants his copy of the Grace Proclamation so he can pin it inside the hall and call it a victory. You pass it to him, and he passes it to a man who ties notes into rope. The chest behind them groans when two men lift it into a cart, coins slurring to one side with the weather's help. Paid, the guildmaster says, bitter at the back like old ale. Paid again, he adds, because that is the kind of counting older men do when their bodies tell them no. He meets your eye with the particular contempt of allies who had to accept a discount. We remember, he says, and you believe him. The councilman's cousin arrives an inch too late to be useful, and an inch too early to be ignored. He brushes the mustard off the front of his cloak with a knuckle. The city thanked you, he says, like a fact he wants praise for escorting. He is looking at the badge on your plank. He is measuring the emptiness where it could sit on your chest. He is making a list of what you cost and what you might purchase if you agree to cost more. You say nothing. This is a skill you taught yourself, and then pretended you were born with. A boy eats his courage and comes near enough to offer a posy, rue, and whatever green the apothecary had left that could be tied into hope. Against bad airs, he says, because children repeat the phrases that do the least harm. You tuck the herbs under your hood and feel his breath ease when he sees you do it. The apothecary gives you a nod like a man counting beans. He will raise his price on rue by a farthing before noon, but he will lower it for her, the boy's mother, if she comes alone. You write nothing. You attend. The rope ages a month between trumpets. The market breathes because that is what markets do when you don't ask them to be noble. You take the long way around the square because your feet make better decisions when they don't feel watched by the dice tent. The trap is shut, dusted like conscience. Men who forgot how to read the day's handwriting counted well in the dark. The cellar keeps its secrets because secrets pay rent on time. At the chapel, the priest lowers a lamp and lets the little flame say all the things his voice cannot without starting an argument. Mercy, he says softly, is useful. He said it yesterday, and it's truer this morning. He watches the muster sheet flip against the shut-ups list in a small breeze and does not pretend not to see what the paper says about the rope. I'll argue device again at council, he adds. Save us the hour. He means, keep me from having to pretend bells cure anything. You nod because nodding is cheaper than positions and costs less later. By the armorer's lean-to, the boys who bucket-chained with you last night have blistered palms and the smiles of men who learn to be proud. You praise them with verbs instead of coin. Carried. saved, held, and their shoulders climb like boats in a tide. The Kamaskar kid pushes a clapper into his belt and declares he prefers the sound of staff knocking stone. You tell him that's the bravest sentence said in this square all week. The steward's badge sits on your plank like a coin with a job. The guild's offer sits in your pocket like a rope over a door. The beetle's coat scratches with the secret slate. Your supervisor fails to cough at the exact moment you want advice. The sheriff has wandered to the far edge to stare at a hinge. Everyone else suddenly has something that looks like work. You take the slate out of the beetle's coat with a delicacy you hope to teach your enemies. He watches you and does not stop you. That is a kind of trust, or exhaustion, or both. The spared addresses 3 today, an ugly little number stare back. You could walk the slate to the guildmaster and tell him to pin it like a trophy and promise him you will stand there while trouble becomes law. You could carry it to the cousin's steward and ask him to teach you how to pretend it was always supposed to be this way. Leak, burn, file. The 3 verbs are not equal. The 3 verbs are not friends. The 3 verbs are all yours. You lift the slate above the brazier where the rosemary exhales its last sweet argument. Smoke curls and offers a decision. The guildmaster finds you at the edge of the ash, and the steward finds you by the shadow of your doubt, and both of them wait for the sound of a choice. You lower the slate. You choose none of the verbs those 2 men prefer. You borrow a 4th, count. You scrape the chalk clean and right, small enough to be read by everyone and claimed by no one. Houses spared this week, 3. Streets, named without door numbers. Cause, none written. You carry the clean fact, turn to public, to the proclamation board, and tack it under the levee sheet, as if it were part of the same weather. The steward chooses not to see it. The guildmaster pretends gratitude. The sheriff reads the shape and lets it occupy a pocket in his head where law learns to wait. File it, the sheriff says when you come back around to his shoulder. Count it louder, he adds lower. He is telling you which noun lives longer in councils, totals, not stories, totals. You put the slate back in the beetle's coat, and the beetle exhales like a man who did not want to carry it without witnesses again. He ties the buttons as if the string could invent morality. The muster roll flaps and swallows a few names. A boy writes his own twice, once as he is, once as he hopes a sergeant will call him. A woman rubs her finger along a blank halfway down, calibrating the width of her loneliness for later. The cousin's steward touches the bottom of the page once, a little signature in body language, then returns to his audience with your plank. Mark more wisely, he repeats, and lets the badge slide nearer your hand. I have a man who counts like you, he adds, and it is meant as enticement and arrives as threat. You pick up the badge and put it back in his palm without opening your own. I'll mark where the rope tells me, you say, and leave the sentence there to lean on him later if it can. You deliver the last duplicates. The coroner asks for a fair copy for a chest that will travel to a shelf, that will travel to a room, that will travel to a drawer, that will keep the story safe from mouths for a while. You pass the parchment to him, and he handles it as if it could start a small fire. The guildmaster wants an extra proclamation for the bread row, a bit of reading to tame a lender's patience. You give him one, and he nods like we are comrades, which we are not, but we are neighbors, and sometimes that is enough. The noon bell begins to think about itself. The herald warms the vowel in mercy like a cough lozenge. The drums linger near your knees, a heartbeat that wants company. People adjust their hats and their hopes. A watchman trades a baton from his left to his right. It is the only time you will see him change hands. A boy with the clapper stares at your staff as if it might be his someday. It could. You hope not. You smell ash and augury and the inside of a jar you forgot to rinse. The mother finds you. She holds her coin, then doesn't. She lets it rest on the plank like a tooth on a pillow. You didn't write 5 words different, she says in a tone that never considers the possibility of complaint. You wrote enough. She looks past you at the yellow knot on the midwife's cord, and then past that at the muster list, and then past that at the far end of the square where nothing is happening, which is often the only good news cities have. You'll watch, she says. It's neither a command nor a question. You answer with the tiniest nod you own, the one that doesn't ripple. When the herald reads the last clause of grace and the drum chooses silence, The square makes a sound like fabric folding. The cousin's steward peels away with a badge still in his palm. The guildmaster buys a string of onions from a woman who will tuck the coins under a cracked tile and call it bank. The sheriff turns his back on show and looks at the rope. The priest readjusts the sanctuary clause in his mouth until it tastes less like a compromise and more like a plan. The apothecary sells one more rue packet and calls it a device because he learned your new word and plans to paint it on his sign. You finish the circuit that tells your feet where you belong. You pass the dice tent and register the trap by scent now, the way a good dog reads weather. You pass the armorer's lean-to and catch a ghost of wet wool, a little heroic stink you will remember when things feel like parchment. You pass the plank and pick up your board, more habit than need. You pass the brazier and give the rosemary ash a bump with your toe, just enough to let it fly and fall and confess to being nothing but what it was. Did the badge mean? It meant a way to launder neglect into a document that didn't bruise when you looked at it. It meant pacifying a crowd with choreographed mercy. It meant mapping who would pay and who would march by pretending to count only bread. It meant bells could sleep while paper did their work. It meant your hand, inked, steady, unspectacular. Let the hinge swing without stirring the night. You own the kit and the silence. You can leak, burn, or file. You chose to count and file and promise to count louder. You can wear the cousin's badge or sleep under the guild's eaves. You chose to wear neither and sleep where your boots remember your door. You can belong to nobody or everybody. You choose to belong to the work because when the rope holds it is never because of a badge, always because of a habit. You straighten the plank. You untie the rag. You cool the seal with a breath and put it to bed like a child who convinced you to tell the story again. The beadle closes his book with a flourish that commits bacon murder. He will never learn to stop doing that. Your supervisor asks, not kindly, did we spend all our luck? And you answer, we spent none, only ink. He grunts like approval and like a man saving argument for someone he respects slightly less. You step into the crowd without being noticed. This is the career, to be a pair of hands remembered by paper and by the occasional look from a sheriff. To be a hinge on which people mistake the door for something else and still pass through safely. To be the person who ties red high and yellow where sellers see it. To be the person who pretends bells are optional until everyone believes it. The muster roll flutters once more and pins itself flat against the timber with the sound of a choice pretending not to be one. You leave it. You leave the badge on the plank. You leave the slate in the coat. You take the board and the pouch and the staff, and you walk to the gate where the rope has learned the manners you taught it. The market changes its weight from left to right and remains itself. If this ending taught you anything about how quiet justice actually gets done, about the cost in coin, in breath, in the little verbs that matter, say so. Hit subscribe, ring the bell you kept off elbows, and drop a comment with your answer to the only poll that matters here, leak, burn, or file. Tell me where you're watching from and whether your town buys its peace with a rope, a badge, or a better habit. I read them, even when the ink says not to, and I'll meet you at the next door that needs a smaller word than law and a steadier hand than